relating to this first question regarding the Sephiroth, I'm going to open this up actually so that I can be more accurate in quoting the question. So let's see, I have it here. Okay. So that is in general helping to understand the Sephiroth, which I struggle with, as well as counting the Omer. So the Sephiroth, when we speak of Sephiroth, it's a Kabbalistic term referring to the 7 emotional attributes, Kabbalistic attributes, and then 3 intellectual attributes. There are a total, of course, 7 plus 3 of 10 Sephiroth, and the Sephiroth really relate to those different attributes as they are expressed by God himself. But God, being the creator of all of us, has also infused these 10 Sephiroth in us and in general in his creation. Now, what are they all about? Not to be esoteric here. So, as mentioned, there are 3 intellectual Sephiroth, Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat, which translate to wisdom, intelligence, and connection. Dat would translate as connection. And those are the 3 really steps to formulating an idea. The first step is that wisdom, that spark of wisdom that we have, that aha moment, as they call it. The second one is developing that spark. What is it about? So let's say I have a startup idea. What is it about? That's intelligence. That's Bina. And then that connection is when I can translate this big idea and bring it into practice, so that it really is revealed to the world and that it has its own, it begins to have its own life. That's Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat. Those are the 3 intellectual attributes, intellectual Sephiroth. You also have the 7 emotional attributes. The first one being Chesed, which means kindness, and usually it is aligned to the right side of a person. Right side of a person, particularly the right arm in the Kabbalistic figure of a human being, is Chesed, kindness. The second emotional Sephirah, by the way, all these are also referred to as root emotions. All emotions in the world, from fear to shame to, you name it, all stem from these 7 emotions. So you have the first one being kindness on the right side, the second one being Gevurah, which means justice, on the left side. And that again, all these feelings of justice, severity, fear, generally emotions that pull you inwards, maybe embarrassment, they relate to Gevurah, to that root emotion of justice. That's usually again on the left side. Then you have on the middle side the third emotion, which is Tiferet, which means glory. But what it really means is harmony. And that is a healthy equilibrium between kindness and justice that creates this beautiful harmony. Because kindness as it stands alone cannot really be kind. If I say yes all the time, I'm not being kind. I'm actually being cruel, because I'm not teaching the art of discipline. Kindness needs to come with some no's. And same with justice. If I'm saying no all the time, I'm not being just. I'm being much more than just, vicious maybe. So therefore it needs to be balanced with a little bit of kindness. What creates that? Tiferet, the third emotion. And that again is in the middle, glory or harmony. Then you go to the lower side of the body and you have 4 additional attributes. The fourth one is Netzach, which really is translated as eternity, but really it refers to the emotion of resilience, perseverance. Netzach is that ability to really fight through. Then you have on the left side, Hod, which means in a way a splendor, but Hod also relates to pride, having this healthy self-esteem that I stand for who I am. And then you have in the middle, you have what's called Yesod, which means foundation. And that is the ability to truly be anchored in something. That's the emotion that maybe creates consistency, creates stability also. That's Yesod. And then the 7th emotion, which is at the very bottom of the human body, is Malchut, which means kingship. But what this really refers to, just emotionally, again, these are 7 emotional attributes. Malchut, kingship, refers to this idea that I can be in control. What kings are in control of populations. Here, this attribute refers to us being in control of ourselves, that I can master myself, that I don't have to fall into every temptation and seduction. When I can really control myself, then I'm a king or a queen. Then I have this attribute. So these are the 7 emotional attributes. Now, how are they connected to this period of time between Passover and Shavuot? And that is because between Passover and Shavuot, we count the Omer. What I refer to when we say we count the Omer, each and every night, we count a different day. Altogether, there are 49 days that we count between Passover and Shavuot, the 58th day being the festival of Shavuot itself. Now, we are asked during this time period to refine ourselves. What is the map for refining ourselves during this time period? By taking these 7 emotional attributes and mixing them with one another, so that you have 7 times 7. 7 times 7 is 49. So it turns out that on each and every day during this counting of the Omer, you can work on one of these attributes mixed with another. So the first day, for example, is kindness and justice. The first week, the first 7 days is the kindness and then each day is kindness mixed with another attribute. So as we said, justice, then harmony, as we said, then consistency, etc. The second week is the dominant attribute is justice, and that again is mixed with all the other attributes. So then again, you have 7 times 7, 49 days on which we can work on every aspect of these emotions to better refine ourselves, and so that ultimately we can be ready for Shavuot, which is the festival of the giving of the Torah, in which God gave us the Torah not just 3,333 years ago, but each and every year anew, and dare I say each and every day anew. And it's up to us to accept it. If we can accept it after being refined emotionally through these 7 times 7 Sephiroth, then we'll be much more receptive to the holiness and to the word of God on Shavuot. So that's really the big idea. And again, I encourage these questions, although they may be Kabbalistic, but I think they, again, as you notice, they pertain to the human condition and how we can work on our root emotions and better ourselves each and every day. Okay, the next question I want to relate to, and that is, what about discussing Yom HaShoah? It's in the chat right here. And again, I encourage you to add more questions to the chat. So indeed, tonight and tomorrow is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Day. It began in Israel because obviously Israel is 10 hours ahead of us. So it already began, as Hannah was mentioning before. Yom HaShoah is a day that was instituted by Ben Gurion and his government, the first government of the state of Israel, shortly after it was established on May 14, 1948, so that people will not forget, the world, Jews obviously won't, but the world won't forget what had just happened 3 years prior to the establishment of the state of Israel. The Second World War and the Holocaust, they came along with it, that decimated 6 million Jews. And if not for the perseverance of many Jews and the allies butting in, who knows if there would be a Jewish nation today, even though I'm confident in the prophecy that says, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, the eternity of Israel will never lie. There'll always be Jews in the world. But who knows how the Jewish people would have looked like if number one, if the Holocaust hadn't stopped, and number two, if the Holocaust hadn't happened. Because if 6 million Jews could have been spared, then there would be many more Jews in the world. Certainly there would be many more books of Judaism in the world, people that represent Judaism in the world, Kiddush Hashem, people that are beacons of light to the world. So who knows how different the world would have been. But again, this Yom HaShoah was instituted by the state of Israel in 1948 for us to, as they say, never forget. But I want to take this a step further, because if there is really one message to Yom HaShoah in general, to the Holocaust, I think that message is encapsulated in the words of Chaim Weizmann, who was the first president of the state of Israel, who shortly after he became the first president, he turned to Israelis and to the Jewish people worldwide, and he said to them that now that Hitler had decimated a third of our nation, indeed 6 million was a third of the Jewish nation, then it's up to each and every Jew from this point on to be a third more Jewish. to make up for the loss of the third of the Jewish nation that was murdered by Hitler. And I think that encapsulates well the message of the Holocaust, because when we mourn the Holocaust, we dare not sink in our mourning. We dare not just come out of this with yet another sigh and another tear, even though those two are important. But the Jewish approach has always been, as we just read a few weeks ago in the Torah portion, that as they tortured us, we multiplied, and we not only persevered, but we doubled and tripled and quadrupled. It's up to us to respond to any void with more actions to fill that void. And therefore, we have to be a third more Jewish, as was suggested by Chaim Weizmann. Think of ways we can indeed increase our Judaism in the world, at least a third more. Maybe do a third more mitzvahs than we do up until this point. Maybe speak about Judaism a third more. Maybe spread the light of Judaism a third more. Maybe involve ourselves in Jewish causes a third more. Maybe come to shul a third more times. Maybe come to Jewish events a third more times. There are many ways to be a third more Jewish, but it's certainly, that message certainly encapsulates, I think, the message of Yom HaShoah, that as we mourn and as we cry over these 6 million brutal, cold-blooded deaths, we ought to ask ourselves, what can we do in order to respond in the Jewish way and act even more and be a third more Jewish? You know, that it's interesting to note that after each, and I've mentioned this before, but that after each and every challenge that we as a people have faced in history, we always responded with a burst of growth, spur of growth like it was never seen before. So, for example, after the destruction of the Second Temple, we moved to Babylon, and we created the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, which became the backbone of Jewish literature, any Jewish library. After the Spanish Inquisition, the School of Kabbalah was established in Tzfat. After the Holocaust, the State of Israel was established. And thank God, Baruch Hashem, it's still thriving today. All that is because the Jewish approach is when we face tragedy, we respond to it by filling that void with even more light, and with more and more and more and more action, at least a third more action that one existed beforehand. So I would encourage everyone that what are the rituals? I mean, people light yahrzeit candles at home, and yes, certainly they pray for the relatives that they may have had in the Holocaust that were murdered. But beyond that, I think it's important to think of how we can be a third more Jewish and take upon ourselves resolutions in that regard and be more active Jewishly, so that we can make up for those that huge void. I think if today there are about 13 million Jews, they say. So I think that if at least half of the Jewish nation can take upon themselves one Jew that was murdered to continue to live the life of just one Jew that was murdered, then we could in a way make up for that tremendous unfathomable loss. Okay, so that's to relate to Yom HaShoah. The next question here is why we make challah in the shape of a key the first Friday after Passover. Janet, yes, you had your hand up, and then I'll relate to this question.
I just wanted to ask,
Sure.
why are we the Jews the only one that speaks about the Holocaust when there were 6 million others that were not Jewish,
Right,
who perished? What
50 million were murdered by Hitler? Yeah.
Kufai speaks about it and is very supportive of the history in the Jewish religion.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Look, absolutely, you're right. Gypsies were targeted, Romanians were targeted, and so on. But I think that we speak about this, first of all, because that's our family. Jews are one big family.
Right.
If my brother is killed, I'll speak about it.
I know why we speak about it.
Right.
I know why we speak about it. I'm wondering why others, I mean, you don't hear about it, or I, as much as we speak about it.
Right. I think it was because of the obsession of Hitler with the Jewish people. I mean, in Mein Kampf, his horrific book, My Struggle, Mein Kampf, he speaks very clearly about the final solution towards Jews, not necessarily towards the other nations. I think the Nazis were the one who made a big noise about it. So maybe that's why. Hannah, yes.
What I wanted to say is kind of answering Janet's question. I was in Poland a few years ago, and I was in Warsaw, and I went to the museum, and the Jews are not even mentioned in the museum. They talk about people that were murdered in the Holocaust. I mean, not Holocaust, they just say murdered by the Germans. So I don't know if that answers your question a little bit, but I was really surprised when I talked to the docent and I said, why aren't the Jews being mentioned? Because a lot of our, people were murdered. And he said, because it was a people's kind of issue. It was all kinds of people were murdered, not just Jews. And that really surprised me. This was in Warsaw, in the Museum of Warsaw. So Polacks see it differently. They just see people murdered. So anyway, it was upsetting.
Isn't it also because people feel guilty and they don't want to talk about what they ignored for so many years and they let this go on?
Maybe you mean what Hannah experienced? Maybe.
No, I'm saying they don't want to talk about it because so many people, the United States refused to believe it for years.
Yeah, it could be. It could very well be. I mean, that was Elie Wiesel's line, fighting against indifference. People were very indifferent about the Holocaust. I don't know. I mean, there could be many theories. I don't know. I do know that, again, as a Jew, I speak about my people more than I speak about my neighbors. Not that my neighbors are not important, but they're my family. But I understand that the question was about other people. Why do they focus on Jews? Some do, some don't. I think, again, it just stems from the reality. The reality is that the Nazis persecuted Jews like no other nation, I believe. They did persecute the Gypsies and others, but I think the Jews were the obsession of Hitler, as is clear by his book, Mein Kampf, and by his actions. All right, let's switch to this topic here. Why we make challah in the shape of a key the first Friday of Passover, after Passover. You're right. So it is a custom that this Shabbat, the challah is shaped in the shape of a key. And in fact, Hadar just did that yesterday, right? Hadar is on the call right here. Maybe you have a picture of your challah to show us. But the reason we do this is because if we follow the story of the grand exodus from Egypt, right? So when they left Egypt, they then went through the Red Sea. This Red Sea split for them. And then after they found themselves, after the Egyptians were drowned all by themselves now as a nation roaming the desert, they had no food. So immediately after Passover, the first Passover, they cried out to God saying, hey, we have no food in the desert. How are we supposed to survive? And that's when God blessed them with the manna, with the food that really stayed with them for 40 years until they entered the promised land. Manna that fell from heaven. Now, because we are trying to be consistent here with the story of the grand exodus and trying to continue to celebrate it, so we celebrated Passover, that celebrated again the grand exodus, the splitting of the Red Sea. What's the next step? The giving of the manna, the delivering of the manna from the heavens to the people in the desert. Now, the manna really represents the key to livelihood. That God unlocked the key to livelihood by showering us with manna, with livelihood, with bread to eat and food for our families. So in order to commemorate this miracle, which happened more or less during this time, right? We make a challah in the shape of a key to remind ourselves of the key that God unlocked for us as he showered upon the nation, the manna from the heavens during this time. That's why we do so. Now, it is a special sgula, it's a special omen, as they say, or fortune, to also unlock our own keys of parnasah, of livelihood. People who need livelihood, and you can never get enough of livelihood, even if you have, the Talmud says, yesh lo mana rotze 200, that a person who's 100 shekels, then he wants 200. If someone has 200, he wants 400. So even Jeff Bezos, who was coined as the wealthiest man in the world just yesterday, for the 4th year in a row, I'm sure he wants more. So we can always ask for more and more and more, including this Shabbat, as we make that key, because as we do so again, it has the power to unlock that key of livelihood no matter how much money we may have. So that's the reason we do so. Okay, next point here. Mindy wrote, wisely, I recommend everyone go to Israel during these holidays, memorials. It is awe-inspiring, the respect for the people and the country. It's true. Yom HaShoah is a very beautiful, I mean, it's a very special, very soul-stirring day, let's put it this way. In Israel, and so is Yom HaZikaron next week,
Yes, yeah.
which is the day in which we remember the fallen soldiers and the victims of terror. And the day that comes immediately after Yom HaZikaron transitions from the saddest day to the happiest day, which is the Independence Day of Israel. It's the day in which we really celebrate our independence on May 14th, 1948. Hey, Iyar, on the 5th of Iyar. Okay, any other topics, any other questions? I don't see anything else here on the chat, but feel free again to unmute yourself.
I have a question.
Yes, please, Mindy.
Okay, I have a friend whose daughter is Orthodox, and my friend went in for surgery on Friday, and then Saturday she needed to be picked up. And her daughter, who is very, very religious, would not pick her up because it was Saturday. And that confuses me. I understand it's Shabbat, but isn't it more important that you go and help your mother, your parents?
That's a great question. So let me just say that for health reasons, we're allowed to desecrate the Shabbat no matter what. So if it was her going to the hospital, of course you're allowed to take her. Coming out of the hospital, if she has the option to stay in the hospital, that's a different story. Unless they're kicking her out, and then she has to be homeless for a day or two. That's considered, health, and then you're allowed to desecrate the Shabbat for that. Coming out of the hospital, then yes, there are values that are almost, not almost, they are sacred. The Torah calls them sacred. One of them is the Shabbat. And if your mother asks you to do something, then of course there's ways to deal with your mother. And I would try to find different ways, maybe get an Uber or get something else. But I can understand the daughter of your friend who adheres to the values as they are described in Torah as sacred. Because this moment we start playing with these values that are sacred, then they lose their sanctity in a way, and maybe eventually they can also be compromised down the line until we lose them altogether. Now again, I don't know the exact situation. If her mother asked her to do so, if it was my mother, I mean, thank God I have a good relationship with my mother, and we are very different people. I could have found a way to explain it to her beautifully and find a solution nonetheless, and it would have been a win-win. So there's ways to go about it, but I also understand the idea that she wanted to preserve the sanctity of Shabbat.
Well, my friend accepted it. It's more me that I feel, shouldn't you honor your parents, your mother, who just had surgery, and instead of getting her an Uber, pick her up? Isn't that also in the commandments to honor your parents?
Yeah, but again, you're not the mother in this case. Maybe the mother feels honored by her daughter keeping the Shabbat.
Not really.
But I don't know. But maybe the mother also understands the daughter so well. I mean, if it's a true relationships are about respect more than they're about love. And I respect the other person's values, even though they might not coincide with mine. So I know it doesn't look good, but every relationship has its own measuring sticks, and only the people involved in that relationship can use those measuring sticks. So I don't know. Again, that's why I'm saying I don't know the details of this, but I will add one more thing. And I think that the brilliance of Judaism in the bigger picture here is that it makes some values absolute. Why is that brilliant? Because when they're absolute, then you have to accommodate yourself to them, ensuring thereby their eternity. The minute you turn your values around to accommodate you become the center of the picture, then they lose their eternity, and then they get lost in history. I think the fact that everyone knows, for example, festivals, Yom Kippur is never too early or never too, it's always too early or too late. It's never on time, right? Why can't we just have Yom Kippur when we want to have Yom Kippur? Everyone complains, Passover this year, was so early. It should have been later. It's usually later. What happened? And but I think that's the beauty. When I have to accommodate myself and my schedule to that value that stands anchored in eternity, then I ensure that this value indeed will remain there forever and ever. The minute I stop playing with it, and that's when I can start losing the eternity of that value. So, and I think it's happened. I think it's happened with less important things, but I think it's happened in Judaism that people have taken values. I'll give you an example. Again, it's less important things, but once upon a time, I think people would dress. Look at my great-grandfather. He would dress like this. This was my great-grandfather.
Wow.
That's how everyone dressed in North Africa back in the time. Now, that was something important to them. That's how Jews dressed. That was their own value. But the next generation came and said, well, that's too hard, too primitive, so let's change it. And we'll dress like this only on Shabbat. And that's what they did for a period of time. And then even on Shabbat, it became too hard. And so on until they lost it altogether. Because the minute you start taking a value and again, adapting it to you, then the value will lose itself in the span of history. So I do respect the adherence to Shabbat. Again, there are rules that tell you that you have to break Shabbat if it's for health reasons, etc. But I respect both sides of the story here.